The chains of Asitra, the forgotten world, the planet Ashura, hung like a broken jewel in the outer rim, its skies choked with ash from orbital bombardment. Once, it had been home to the lyserigental beings whose iridescent wings caught starlight like living prisms. Now, those same wings were clipped, bound, and broken. The Krelthan's sovereignty had come 3 cycles ago, bringing chains and cruelty in equal measure. They called it resource acquisition. The galaxy called it Tuesday. No one intervened. No one ever did. The Galactic Council had rules. After all, treaties, protocols, and the Lysari weren't valuable enough to risk offending a major power. So Ashara burned quietly, just another footnote in a civilization that had perfected the art of looking away. The price of indifference, the labor camps carved into Ashara's poisoned earth. The Lysari worked until their bodies failed. Children too young to remember freedom hauled, or alongside elders who had once danced among the clouds. The Krelthans were efficient oppressors. They knew exactly how much suffering a species could endure before extinction became unprofitable. Overseers with shockstaves patrolled the pits, their laughter echoing off walls of stone. But something changed when the human ship dropped from faster-than-light travel. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't even military. The Prairie Fire was a colony transport, rerouted after its crew picked up distress signals the Council had conveniently never received. Captain Maria Santos stood on her bridge, staring at sensor readouts that made her blood boil. Her crew mechanics, farmers, teachers looked to her with questions in their eyes. She gave them an answer humanity had been practicing for millennia. We don't leave people in chains. Deathworlders Krelthans had heard rumors about humans, of course. Every species in the Council had. Earth was classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, designation reserved for planets so hostile that sentient evolution should have been impossible. Gravity that crushed lighter species. Atmospheric oxygen levels that were literally poisonous to most carbon-based life. Weather patterns that shifted from benign to apocalyptic in hours. Redditors evolved in an arms race so brutal that the top of the food chain learned to cook its prey for better nutrition. The galaxy viewed humans with a mixture of curiosity and unease. They were pleasant enough in diplomatic settings, certainly. But there was something unsettling about creatures whose idea of extreme sports involved hurling themselves off cliffs with fabric wings, or whose children's stories featured casual planetary disasters. The Krelthans didn't worry much about these rumors. After all, they had shockstaves. What they didn't understand was that humans had evolved something far more dangerous than physical resilience. They had evolved spite. The debt collector Maria Santos didn't send a diplomatic message. She didn't file a formal protest with the Council. She simply walked into the main labor camp with 37 colonists at her back, farmers who'd grown up hunting, teachers who'd done military service, engineers who understood that sometimes you build and sometimes you tear down. The Krelthans laughed at first. These soft-looking bipeds with their inadequate armor and primitive kinetic weapons. The camp overseer, a scarred veteran named Throck, actually smiled. He raised his shockstave in a gesture that had made thousands cower. Maria looked at it, then at him. "You know what debt is?" she asked, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent camp. Throck's translator caught up. "Your species owes nothing here, human." Maria's smile was colder than any vacuum. Wrong. The universe owed the Lysari justice. Since no one else was paying, the debt transferred to us. She pulled her sidearm, and humanity always collects its debts. The reckoning begins the Krelthans learned about human reflexes when Throk's shockstave was still rising and Maria's bullet had already shattered his primary skull plate. They learned about human pack bonding when 37 colonists moved as one coordinated unit, covering angles and protecting each other with the fluid grace of a species that had survived ice ages and supervolcanoes. They learned about human stubbornness when their reinforcements arrived and the fighting intensified instead of stopping. In the chaos, something remarkable happened. A human engineer named Chen, bleeding from a shockstave burn, stopped mid-firefight to shield a fallen Lysari child with his own body. A Lysari elder, seeing this stranger sacrifice safety for her granddaughter, made a choice. She spread wings that hadn't flown in 3 cycles, wings clipped and scarred, but not yet broken, and launched herself at a Krelthan, aiming at Chen's exposed back. Her talons, evolved for gripping tree branches, found softer targets. Across the camp, the Lysari began to rise. When Deathworlders teach, the battle for Ashara lasted 6 hours. Not because the Krelthans were particularly formidable, but because the humans took time to teach. Maria's crew didn't just fight, they showed the Lysari how to fight back, how to use shockstaves as weapons instead of instruments of torture, how to coordinate attacks, how to exploit the Krelthans' over-reliance on technological superiority. A mechanic named Sarah, who'd never expected to use her military training again, found herself instructing a group of teenage Lysari in basic squad tactics using diagrams scratched in the ash. They learned fast. Desperation is the universe's finest teacher, and the Lysari had been excellent students of suffering. Now they studied liberation with the same desperate intensity. When the Krelthan command ship attempted orbital bombardment, they found their targeting systems mysteriously offline. The Prairie Fire's engineer, a man who'd designed irrigation systems before this day, had turned out to be remarkably talented at hacking military-grade networks. "Spite is one hell of a motivator," he muttered, fingers dancing across his console. The message sent by the Time Galactic Council peacekeepers arrived fashionably late. As always, the Krelthans were gone. Not just defeated, gone. The survivors had fled in whatever ships still functioned, spreading word across the outer rim of the insanity they'd encountered. Humans who fought like demons. Humans who refused to acknowledge that some fights weren't worth fighting. Humans who apparently didn't understand that you weren't supposed to start wars over species you'd never even met. The council representatives, all pristine uniforms and diplomatic credentials, found Captain Santos sitting among the Lysari, sharing ration packs and tending wounds. The head diplomat, a Valorian named Tixith, cleared his breathing apparatus. "Captain Santos, you've created an ... incident. The Krelthan sovereignty is demanding reparations." Maria stood slowly, and every human in the camp stood with her. "Tell them to get in line," she said quietly. "Behind everyone they've enslaved. Behind every species the council decided wasn't worth saving." Tixith's feathers ruffled in confusion. "You don't understand galactic politics." "No," Maria interrupted. "You don't understand humanity. We remember who helped us when we reached the stars, and we remember who didn't." She gestured to the freed Lazari. "The debt is paid. If the sovereignty wants to collect on theirs, we'll be waiting." A debt unpaid. The news spread through council space like wildfire through oxygen-rich atmosphere. Humans, those peculiar Deathworlders who smiled too much and fought too hard, had just torn down a slave operation and told one of the galaxy's major powers to come collect. Diplomatic channels lit up with outrage, confusion, and something new, fear. because humanity had done what no other species dared. They'd looked at the comfortable injustice the galaxy had accepted and said no. Not no. Thank you. Not perhaps we should discuss this. Just no. In the ruins of the labor camps. Now being rebuilt as proper settlements, the Lycery children who'd never known freedom began to sing, their elders. Wings healing slowly taught them the old songs. And Maria Santos, who'd woken up that morning planning to colonize a distant world, sat and listened to music born from liberation. Captain, Chen asked, bandages wrapped around his burned arm, do you think we just started a war? Maria looked up at Ashura's clearing skies, where the prairie fire hung in orbit, a civilian ship that had become something more through sheer necessity. Maybe, she admitted, but some debts are worth going into the red for. The RE Ewing, the Galaxy Watcher's news of Ashara reached every corner of Council space within days. FTL communication ensured that no atrocitarian, no act of defiance could stay hidden for long. On 1,000 worlds, 1 billion screens displayed the same footage, humans fighting alongside the Lycery, colonial farmers becoming warriors, and Captain Maria Santos telling the Galactic Council exactly where they could file their objections. The reactions split along predictable lines. The powerful species, the Krelthans, the Valorians, the ancient Trekva consortium called it terrorism, piracy, an unforgivable breach of galactic law. But in the slums of industrial worlds, in the forgotten colonies of the Outer Rim, in places where the Council's justice had never quite reached, people watched with something else in their eyes. Hope, and the powerful had learned long ago. That hope was far more dangerous than any weapon. The Krelthan Response Supreme Commander, Voctor of the Krelthan sovereignty, did not believe in half measures. The loss of Ashara was more than a financial setback, was an insult that demanded blood. He assembled a battle fleet, 12 warships, bearing enough firepower to glass a small moon. His officers expected they'd be hunting the prairie fire across the Outer Rim, making an example of these upstart Deathworlders. Instead, Voctor did something that surprised even his own strategists. He sent a message directly to Earth's government, bypassing the Council entirely. You have 48 hours to surrender Captain Santos and her crew for trial. Refuse, and we will consider it an act of war against the sovereignty. Your species is young. Do not let foolish heroics end your story before it truly begins. It was a masterful placate the humans. Make them choose between honor and survival. Show the galaxy that defying the sovereignty came with consequences too severe to bear. Voctor expected negotiation, maybe some backroom deal where Santos was quietly handed over. What he got instead was a response from Earth's Secretary of Defense, a grandmother named Patricia Chen who'd spent 40 years in military service. Her message was 3 words long: come collect her. The line in the stars, the Krelthan fleet jumped into the Sol system, expecting intimidation to do most of the work. What they found was an entire species that had taken the threat personally. Earth's orbital platforms hummed with charging weapons. The lunar defense grid lit up like a constellation of angry stars. Mars Colony had mobilized its atmospheric processors into makeshift mass drivers. And surrounding it all, scattered across the system in a defensive sphere, were ships. Military vessels, yes, Earth had those, but also civilian transports retrofitted with weapons, mining ships carrying payloads that weren't ore, even a luxury cruise liner whose passengers had voted unanimously to stay and fight. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands, many barely armed, some held together with hope and welding. It was the most ridiculous, impractical, utterly human response imaginable. Commander Voctor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. They're going to fight. All of them. Over one captain and a colony ship. His tactical officer, who'd studied human history as a hobby, made a sound that might have been amusement or despair. Sir, they once fought a war for 99 years over a wooden bucket. This is actually pretty restrained for them. The things we fight for on Earth, in a small apartment in New Manila. An old woman named Sophia watched the news with tears streaming down her face. 50 years ago, her parents had been refugees from a corporate war on Titan. A colony ship called Prairie Fiara. Different one, but the name was reused. Often had taken them in when no one else would. She picked up her phone and transferred her entire savings to Earth's defense fund. Across the planet, billions made similar choices. Not because they knew Maria Santos personally, not because they cared about the Lycery specifically, but because humanity had learned something fundamental in its violent climb from the caves. If you don't stand up for strangers today, no one will stand up for you tomorrow. In the council chambers, representatives from 100 species watched in confusion as humans demonstrated a concept that had no direct translation in most galactic languages. They called it principle. The idea that some things mattered more than survival, that dignity had value beyond profit, that there were lines you didn't cross, and people worth fighting for even when the odds were impossible. The galaxy thought humanity was insane. They were right, but they'd misunderstood what kind of insanity it was. The first shot Commander Voctor didn't want a full war. He wanted a quick strike, a demonstration of power that would make Earth surrender before real bloodshed began. So he ordered his flagship to fire a warning shot to plasma lance designed to vaporize one of the smaller civilian vessels. A show of force to break their spirits. The lance never reached its target, a mining ship called Lucky Strike, crewed by 15 people who'd spent their lives pulling ice from asteroids, put itself in the path. The ship's captain, a man named James Rodriguez, who'd never served a day in the military, sent one message before his vessel exploded. Not today. 14 other ships moved to fill the gap his sacrifice had created. On Earth, in command centers and living rooms and bars, people watched, and something ancient woke in the human heart, the terrible, beautiful thing that had let them survive ice ages and plagues and each other. The thing that made them look at impossible odds and say, "Watch me." Secretary Chen's voice echoed across every military channel. All ships, weapons free. Show them why you don't threaten a Deathworlders home. The Battle of Salve, the battle was chaos. Glorious, terrifying, utterly insane chaos. The Krelthan warships were superior in every measurable way, better shields, more powerful weapons, crews trained for combat since birth. It should have been a massacre. It was just not the massacre Voctor expected. Human tactics made no sense. Ships would accelerate on collision courses, then veer away at the last second, forcing Krelthan vessels to waste shots on evasion. Civilian transports broadcast false signatures, making targeting impossible. A cruise liner rammed a destroyer, its elderly passengers cheering as they took the warship's shields down in a mutual destruction that let 3 smaller Vestas slip through. The mining ships were worst of all. They'd spent decades learning to navigate asteroid fields, to predict trajectories, to work in 3 dimensions where up and down were meaningless concepts. Now they applied those skills to war, swarming the Krelthan ships like angry insects. Too many targets to track, each one carrying payloads that hadn't been designed for combat but worked beautifully anyway. A ship called Iron Bottom Sound pulled alongside a Krelthan cruiser and dumped its entire cargo hold. 50,000 tons of ore directly into the warship's engine ports. The resulting explosion could be seen from Mars. When Deathworlders unite, but the turning point came from an unexpected source. As the battle raged, FTL signatures began appearing across the system. Ships from other species. Not many, a few dozen at first. The Council had forbidden intervention, after all. These were the outcasts, the rebels, the species who remembered their own Ashara. A Lysari combat wing, flying ships so new the paint was barely dry, painted in the colors of freed wings. A trio of Mekla dreadnoughts whose captains had grown tired of the sovereignty's expansion. Even a single Valorian destroyer whose crew had mutinied against their orders to stand down. They came not because they loved humanity. Most had never met a human before that day. They came because the prairie fire had shown them something the galaxy had forgotten, that someone, somewhere, would fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. And if humanity was insane enough to start that fight, well, maybe insanity was contagious. The Valorian captain sent a message on all frequencies. The debt transfers. If you want humanity, you'll have to go through all of us. Commander Vokta watched his tactical display fill with new signatures and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear, the price of awakening. The Krelthan fleet retreated after 6 hours. Not defeated, they could have fought longer. But Vokta wasn't stupid. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a message being broadcast across every channel in Council space. Attack one, and they'll all come. He'd thought he was punishing an upstart species. Instead, he'd awakened something the galaxy had kept carefully sedated. The idea that the weak didn't have to stay weak. That power had responsibilities. That there were species who would fight for principles over profit. In the aftermath, as rescue ships pulled survivors from the wreckage and Earth counted its dead, Maria Santos received a summons. Not from the Council, from Earth itself. She stood in the Secretary's office, still wearing her stained colony uniform, expecting reprimand or court-martial. Instead, Patricia Chen offered her a chair and a drink. Captain Santos, you've started something. The Outer Rim colonies are demanding protection. 3 species have requested formal alliances. The Council is in chaos. Maria took the drink. I'm sorry. I just couldn't. Don't apologize, Chen interrupted. We spent 200 years trying to fit into galactic civilization. Being polite, following rules. Making ourselves smaller so we wouldn't scare anyone. She smiled. Maybe it's time we reminded the galaxy what Deathworlders really are. The new debt. The new Deathworlders Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The charges against humanity were extensive. Unauthorized military action. Interference in sovereign affairs. Inciting rebellion across Council space, and the vague but serious charge of disrupting galactic stability. Earth's representative, Ambassador Marcus Williams, listened patiently to 3 hours of accusations. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly. Honorable members, I hear your concerns. Your right, humanity did disrupt your stability. We disrupted the stability that let the Lysari suffer in silence. We disrupted the stability that turned slavery into a footnote in your reports. We disrupted the stability that made looking away more important than doing what's right. He looked around the chamber, meeting eyes that belonged to species who'd seen 1,000 more years of civilization than his own. You want to charge us? Fine. But understand this, Humanity will not apologize for paying debts the galaxy chose to ignore. And if that means we're guilty, then we'll wear that guilt proudly. The chamber erupted in chaos. Some species called for sanctions. Others, quietly, called for membership applications. The vote on humanity's guilt was close, but the vote on what to do about it failed entirely, because too many species were watching from worlds that had their own Asharas, their own unpaid debts. And now they knew someone was willing to collect the debt. Eternal 6 months later, Captain Maria Santos stood on Ashura's surface, now officially renamed New Haven. The labor camps were gone, replaced by settlements built with materials donated by a dozen species. The Lysari children flew freely, their wings healed and whole. A young Lysari approached her, one of the children Chen had shielded during the battle. She held a small object of feather, iridescent and beautiful. "For your ship," she said in carefully practiced English, "so you remember us." Maria knelt down. "Sweetheart, humanity doesn't forget our debts. Any of them." That night, she stood beneath alien stars with her crew, watching the prairie fire being retrofitted in orbit. No longer a colony ship. Something new, something the galaxy would come to know well. Chen raised a drink. "To the debt collectors." Maria smiled. "To the debt collectors, may we always have the courage to collect what the universe owes the defenseless." Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, beings looked up at the stars and wondered if someone might come for them too. Wondered if the Deathworlders who'd awakened might bring that terrible, beautiful thing they called justice. The powerful species understood that the galaxy had changed. Humanity hadn't just defended itself. It had shown everyone else that defense was possible. That the old order wasn't inevitable. That debts could be collected, chains could be broken. And sometimes sometimes doing the right thing mattered more than doing the safe thing. The Deathworlders had awakened, and the galaxy would never be the same.